Pedro I was the first emperor of Brazil and the founder of the Brazilian Empire. Born on October 12, 1798, Pedro grew up in court, heir to the Portuguese throne. Pedro grew up neglected by his parents. His mother, Queen Carlota Joaquina, tended to favor her second son Miguel over him, and his father, João IV, feared his children and thus ignored Pedro. This changed when Napoleon and his forces marched on Portugal. Pedro, then aged 9, was nearly sent to Brazil to ensure that his family's dynasty would continue should Napoleon conquer Portugal, but his trip was delayed until the entire royal court was forced to flee. In Brazil in 1808, the royals established a court in Rio de Janeiro, among many other institutions. During his time there, Pedro lived in the palace stables. He never received more than a very basic education, unfamiliar with etiquette and matters of government. João stayed in Brazil for 18 years, not wishing to return even after Napoleon's exile. In an attempt to calm opposition to his choice to rule so far from his own country, he elevated Brazil to the status of a monarchy and tried to rule both, but ultimately he was pressured to return by an uprising in Portugal. Pedro, aided by pressure from the Brazilian party, convinced his father to let him stay and lead Brazil rather than returning to Portugal with the rest of his family. João did not want to put Pedro in a position of authority, but also did not wish to lose the Portuguese throne, so he made Pedro regent in Brazil. Soon after João's return, the Portuguese Cortes, or Parliament, began attempting to return Brazil to its colonial status. They tried to get Pedro to return to Portugal, claiming it was to complete his education. Pedro was approached by Brazilian conspirators and agreed to refuse the Cortes' attempts if they could gain him support within Brazil. They did so, but Pedro still nearly backed out of his agreement, saying he would still return to Portugal but delay his trip until he could contact his father and the Cortes. Upon seeing the disapproval of the Brazilian party, he changed his mind and chose to stay, famously saying, "Since it is for the good of all and for the general happiness of the nation, I am ready. Tell the people that I shall remain." By popular demand, Pedro established a Brazilian Cortes. He soon declared war on any Portuguese forces which did not immediately return to Portugal. He began to travel the country to gain support, on his travels recognizing that many Brazilians strongly disliked the colonial regime. Thus, on September 7th, 1822, Pedro declared Brazil an empire independent from Portugal. At the time of his declaration of independence, Pedro was an incredibly popular leader. However, from here onwards his popularity would only decrease, eventually leading to his abdicating the Brazilian throne. It was vital that Brazil be recognized as an independent empire by other countries for its continued existence, and other countries would only recognize Brazil's independence if Portugal did so first. Pedro convinced Portugal to recognize Brazil, but only on the conditions that Brazil had to pay the loan Portugal raised to fight the colony and to end slave trade. These conditions were very unpopular among Brazilians, as many in the Brazilian party were plantation and slave owners who did not want to give up a major source of their income. Furthermore, in 1826 Pedro's father died, making him king of Portugal. Many Brazilians saw Pedro as ruling both countries as a threat to Brazil's independence, fearing that Pedro would return Brazil to being a colony. Pedro also participated in a war with Buenos Aires over control of the Banda Oriental, against the popular opinion of his subjects. He soon visited the field of this war to encourage enlistment in the army and increase morale in his soldiers. But in his absence, rumors and unrest spread throughout Rio, generating hatred for the emperor. To make matters worse, while he was away, his wife Queen Leopoldina passed away, and rumors spread that she died of injuries from Pedro's abusing her during pregnancy. Whether this was true is uncertain, but the important factor is that his subjects believed it to be true and judged him even more harshly as a bad husband as well as a bad ruler. The unrest in Rio prompted Pedro to return. Soon riots began to break out in Rio between the Brazilian and Portuguese parties, the Brazilian party favoring constitutionalism, while the Portuguese party favored absolutism. 24 deputies signed a manifesto demanding those responsible in the street riots be punished, and while this prompted the dismissal of ministry, it did not cause any significant change to Pedro's increasingly absolutist government. Pedro called the assembly to meet and tried to take care of the situation, but finding them to be incompetent, he replaced them with 6 of the aristocracy, all of whom were unpopular among his subjects. On the very same day, the opposition of Brazilian Cortes, combined with the local uprisings, pressured Pedro to abdicate the Brazilian throne in 1831. At only age 5, his son Pedro II became king in his place. Back in Portugal, Miguel had usurped the throne from Pedro's daughter Maria, so Pedro helped take it back for her, battling Miguel's forces. Soon enough, Maria was able to secure the throne shortly before Pedro died of disease.